Hello, welcome again to Sports Unlocked, going inside the week's sports news. Joining me, Rob Harris from Sky News as ever, Martyn Ziegler from The Times, and Tariq Panja from The New York Times. It might seem like Groundhog Day, Club World Cup to talk about, and the football regulator for men's football, Martyn. How many times have we been going through this launch?
Quite a lot, but interesting. I think the interesting changes to the regulator which the new governments have brought in.
Something we talk about quite a lot on the pod is the lack of news conferences, particularly in world football, whether it's at FIFA. So we should note the fact that Confederation of African Football did hold a press conference lasting about an hour and 20 minutes with the President Patrice Motsepe this week.
Hour and 20 minutes, that must be a record. That's sort of going back in time to the old days.
It lasted so long, he did notice some of the journalists were flagging and reminded them there was a very delicious Ethiopian lunch awaiting them at the end of that.
Yeah, I'd have enjoyed some of that. Perhaps you'd have enjoyed the salary of Lionel Messi, who is going to be quite a feature of this week's episode because, such as the openness of Major League Soccer, we know how much he earned last season, a $12 million base salary, and overall he earned $20.5 million. But he might well have got a lot more in their performance bonuses from the team itself, and he earned more than the entire wage bill of 22 of the 29 MLS franchises.
There is a salary cap in the MLS, but you can have, I think, 3 exemptions where you can pay whatever you want. So clearly he comes under in one of those brackets. But you do have this weird thing where you have players earning a pittance by comparison next to somebody who's earning tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah, this is the designated player status. But the other thing with Messi is that he gets a cut of the contract with Apple, the broadcast contract, which was, they had to come up with a way of attracting Messi to MLS, and those were the ways. And you could argue, given how much attention, how successful it's been for the league in terms of generating this attention, that's the price if you want Lionel Messi in your league.
Did win the Supporters' Shield with Inter Miami last weekend. Stay tuned for a lot more on that. Staying in America, and Tariq, you've reported a lot on doping, the criticism of China, then in reverse, the criticism of the likes of WADA about the US anti-doping system. This week, a player in the NFL has been found to have violated their performance-enhancing substances policy. But what was the ban?
2 games. How does that compare, Rob, with international sports under the WADA code? Probably going to be 2 to 4 years in international sports. So, you can look at it from outside. I think this is insanely lax. And it's not just the NFL. You'll have the NBA and baseball that are outside the World Anti-Doping Code.
This is the Detroit Lions wide receiver, Jameson Williams, who did say it was a complete surprise. And he says he's overly cautious, even taking over-the-counter medicine. And he says he's never attempted to cheat or seek an unfair advantage. But you do have liability, don't you?
The NFL's got a big problem with this. We're looking at something like 300 positive drugs tests for players since 2001. And they all, basically, they just get effectively a slap on the wrist and off they go. And I think everybody who takes these sort of things seriously realizes that they're just paying lip service to anti-doping.
And that's with the Olympics being in the United States in 2028 in LA, the Summer Games, and the Winter Games in Salt Lake City in 2034. Maybe there'll be increased scrutiny of just how the US is prosecuting doping cases and how it's punishing dopers when they're outside of the WADA system.
Well, there should be. And another element to this is that controversial Rodchenkov Act that gives the United States all of this power to prosecute doping in international sport wherever it may take place in the world, except if it takes place in the NFL, in the NBA, or ice hockey and the other professional leagues. So, when people are saying this is really hypocritical, these sort of cases perhaps strengthen their case.
Disciplinary matters in England in football from the Football Association, and a Nottingham Forest owner, Evangelos Marinakis, banned for 5 matches for spitting on the floor. That was when the match officials were nearby at the stadium. Martyn, you've been delving into the detail of it. It's great we do get these written reasons.
Yeah, it's great that we do, and this was his defence. A witness statement from Evangelos Marinakis said that he smokes 2 or 3 cigars a day, often needs to expectorate and or coughs, and if he has to spit, he spits into a tissue if one is available, or on the floor if he does not have one available. Next time you get invited to the director's box in Nottingham Forest, just be aware you're taking your life into your hands.
You can wear a mask.
You might want to, that hacking cough and smoking 2 or 3 cigars a day. Is that why the Premier League meeting was partly virtual this week, the emergency meeting?
Well, yes, perhaps people who'd read the written reasons decided not to attend him in person.
So the ongoing fallout from the associated party transaction case brought by Manchester City against the Premier League, still both sides claiming victory of sorts. Now the attempt to clean up the rules all about sponsorships and the value of them, and when you get access to data of the value, when you're particularly trying to get through a related party transaction. A sense of the infighting from this meeting.
And speaking to people who were there, said it was a sort of fairly jovial, generally good-humoured, but there was Simon Cliff, the Manchester City legal director, who was quite punchy and contradicted Richard Masters and saying, no, these associated party rules are void and unlawful. And that's Manchester City's position, but both sides are still waiting for clarity from the tribunal. So, I mean, this is going to be an ongoing thing for some time until we know what the exact status is.
This is Simon Cliff, let's not forget, who sent that letter, the explosive letter to all the clubs in the day following the verdict, in which he pretty much said the same thing, and also infuriated a lot of them by saying, look, if you want proper legal advice, just come to us, guys. We'll explain it all.
But ultimately, they do have to rewrite these rules because they were partly found to be unlawful, anti-competitive, and there is an issue in terms of how you do formulate them, because there is a sense that from this tribunal ruling, there was no intention to put the entire profit and sustainability rule system in the bin in relation to these sponsorships from those companies linked to the ownerships.
No, I think that's correct. That this isn't the associated party transactions being abandoned completely, but I think it's pretty serious still in that some of the new rules brought in were said to be unlawful by the Commission, and some of the process around deciding whether Manchester City's massive new Etihad deal was fair market value or not. I suppose the issue is, can they get that Etihad deal through now because of what's happened? Obviously, they're Manchester City hoping they are. Is because the process was found to be wrong, does that mean the deal has to be approved? That's I think the key factor here.
That'd be really strange, wouldn't it? In terms of, in this gap, everyone agrees that this isn't fair market value, but because it's in this gap of this grey area, it must be waved through. Those are some really weak arguments and logic in order for what should happen next. Because if you're one of the other 19 clubs, you'll say, what? So let's whack on a 500 million sponsorship here because it's in this little gap, and then let's start the rules again. That doesn't make any sense moving forward.
I know what you mean, but not everybody said that it wasn't fair market value. Obviously, Manchester City claimed it was fair market value, and the process was found to be wrong. So that's the issue.
So in terms of the Etihad deal, this was the technicality related to how long it took for the Premier League to rule, and the fact Manchester City was not allowed to see the database projections on which the panel ruled that the Etihad deal was way above market value.
But if Manchester City are feeling short of supporters, they perhaps gained an unlikely one this week. Former Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger, who didn't he talk about financial doping in the past?
He did. It was his. He was one of the people who coined the phrase, if you remember. At Arsenal, he was always really complaining about financial doping. Really, I think in his case, it was related to Abramovich and Chelsea, but also these state clubs. And where was he speaking? He was speaking on, Rob,
Qatar's beIN Sports. Now, I don't know who was speaking as the former Arsenal manager, Arsene Wenger, or FIFA's Arsene Wenger as the chief of global football development. And this is what he had to say.
And I feel the rules of a financial fair play today have to be changed in the Premier League because they face now competitions from other leagues who have changed the financial fair play rules. And at the moment, you cannot see a club like Man City being charged by 115 different charges in a football season. I don't believe in that. That it's a clever club, well managed, well run, and the Premier League lost already a case, the first case against them, that is more linked with the commercial activities.
When you managed at club level at Arsenal, you were always very concerned about having to compete against clubs like City because of the money they had. Have you made a 180?
Because they came in and they had not faced any financial fair play, nor has Chelsea. Chelsea had they bought my players, and Chelsea as well bought what they wanted because there was no financial fair play.
So Arsene Wenger there speaking on beIN Sports. One of the things that stands out, he talks about the Premier League losing the case. So certainly he took one version of events.
Well, I noticed that too. I wonder if Arsene Wenger has read the 175 pages, or he's either read some of the press or had a briefing. It'd be interesting to ask Arsene if you're up for it. Welcome to Sport Unlocked anytime you like. I'd love to discuss this with you.
And do you think he has a sense of what the 115 charges actually relate to? The fact it's not just pure FFP compliance in terms of overspend?
Well, bluntly, I didn't think he really had a clue about what he was talking about. It was very superficial. It was an off-the-cuff response from him on something that is probably a little bit complicated. You might want to know the facts. And it's strange because Arsene Wenger, of course, is considered as one of the thinking men of football. But that comment or those comments on beIN suggested he's not really thought about it that much, certainly not read much about this.
Certainly very, very different from the days when he was Arsenal manager. Manchester City were their big rivals, and obviously, as we mentioned, the famous financial doping comment.
Be interesting to see if these comments end up in the Manchester City case, because it is a very notable figure backing them.
A professor, no less. Professor of football.
Indeed. So many questions around about whether the Premier League can govern itself, whether English football can govern itself. Reintroduction of the football regulator bill in England. Now, this has been spoken about before because the previous Conservative government attempted to bring it in and they ran out of time before the general election that they called. So this is now the Labour version of the bill, which will ultimately lead to an independent football regulator overseeing the men's game. Now, something that has been removed from this bill is a reference to UK trade and foreign policy, and effectively any takeovers that would be approved would have to abide by it. And if that stayed in, UEFA were effectively threatening to ban English teams from European competitions if they carried out that threat because of government interference. So this is something notable, although I think we've seen that if a government might want to meddle, they could do anyway in such a thing.
Well, we saw with Newcastle United's takeover, there certainly was a lot of government meddling going on. So this regulator will, its primary role will be to carry out checks on owners and directors for takeovers, and also to clubs will have to provide sort of financial information to get a license to show that they're sustainable for the following season. So that's the idea of it. I think it's UEFA were particularly unhappy about the thing about having to take into account foreign policy, because you could have this issue where the regulator thinks there's a bad owner or a bad director but can't get rid of them because they're from a sort of important trading partner of UK. So that's one thing that's been ditched. The other major change is that the regulator is now going to have power over parachute payments, which is the money paid to clubs relegated from the Premier League. That has caused a lot of unhappiness with the top flight English clubs.
Because there is this impasse. The Premier League redistributes cash down the footballing pyramid to the EFL, shares some of its wealth, but they haven't struck a new deal, a new redistribution model. And up for discussion now are those parachute payments. So these payments can be up to £48 million a season for a club relegated from the Premier League, which the EFL says distorts their championship competition.
Yeah, 48 million for the first year you get relegated, 40 million for the second year, and then also a big chunk for after that.
Premier League says it's necessary to ensure that clubs, when they are promoted, feel they can spend with confidence, knowing they've got that cushion if they are eventually relegated, as we have seen in recent years with the promoted teams. Something's quite interesting if we forget our history. In 2020, there was something called Project Big Picture. This was actually being overseen by Rick Parry, who is the chair of the EFL, which would have seen the top 6 elite in the Premier League gain more power, the ability to sell their TV rights, while striking this sort of deal to guarantee 25% of all Premier League revenue for the lower leagues for many years. So complex power plays in the game here.
Yeah, obviously, in terms of teams and leagues, they're going to fight for their own interests. And if someone's offering 25% of the Premier League's revenue to the EFL, they'll probably bite your hand off. And obviously, he represents them. And to be honest, this idea that the regulator has control of the parachute payments, this is in the last instance. Is that correct? If the league and if the Football League and the Premier League cannot strike a deal, which they've struggled to do, the government regulator will step in. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah. I mean, at the moment, the Premier League decides what the parachute payments are. There is no discussion with the EFL. They just say, this is what we're paying. That's what it is. So it's going to be an interesting issue, and I'm sure if there's an attempt to reduce those parachute payments, there'll be the mother of all arguments.
Yeah, can I just connect the last two conversations we just had? We had a chat about Man City, and now we're talking about this regulator, guys. The one thing this regulator won't do is deal with any of this mess that the Premier League has in terms of regulating itself. It's a shame for me in terms of the regulation bill. I kind of wanted a stronger regulator with greater powers over all of these regulatory matters. So the moment the teams in the Premier League make up their own rules and the league is supposed to enforce them, and we can see that's been an absolute car crash in recent years.
And it's for the clubs to decide how open they are, whether we even see these verdicts, what we know about any of the cases, or the progression of disciplinary charges. And the Manchester City case is a case in point. So perhaps the structure of these cases would have been something for a regulator to get involved in, rather than some of the detail. I mean, there is a sense that the regulator is gaining powers to enforce fan engagement on changes to ticket prices and the badges of clubs, but it's not very clear reading through the bill how that has to be put into effect by clubs. They're certainly not mandating fans on boards.
No, they don't have. They have no power over ticket price rises. They just say clubs have to consult their fans, which could be anything, couldn't it? I mean, I think generally, I'm not convinced that the regulators is going to be this sort of panacea everyone thinks for all the ills of football at all. So it'll be interesting to see whether actually it is worth the money it's going to cost to establish it and run it.
They are going to have every single VAR complaint landing at the door of the football regulator, which apparently will be a £130,000 a year job for a 3-day week. Yeah,
for the chairman or chairwoman of the regulator, I don't think that's much money at all, really. So it'd be interesting to see what sort of calibre of person they attract.
The origins of the football regulator date back to the ill-fated Super League and the fan protests that crushed the breakaway in April 2021. So many questions, though, about why the clubs did think they could launch this competition, and questions about whether or not they had inferred or implied backing from Gianni Infantino. Of course, it is denied by him or is attempted to do so, but down the line, here we now have a huge FIFA club competition, the Club World Cup. And just take a listen to what Infantino had to say this week at the CAF General Assembly about what he wants FIFA's role in the club game to be.
Club football was at the basis of football, was born as a national movement. It then became more and more continental as well. And after 150 years of history of football, it's time that club football as well becomes global. Now, there are, of course, some voices who would like to keep everything for themselves, who don't like that competitions become global, but we are. FIFA is, you are, inclusive. We are. FIFA is, and you are, non-discriminatory. And we want all of you to have a chance to participate also with club football, with the new Club World Cup taking place next year in the United States of America, with 4 African clubs, 4 of the best African clubs. We want all of you to have a chance, and your players to have a chance to shine at the global stage. And of course, it will be a huge success. It will be a huge sporting success. It will be a huge commercial success.
We haven't had a TV deal or any sponsorship announcement. So usual tub-thumping positive speech, but without any detail as usual. And again, there was no chance to ask any questions of how he plans to make this all truly global. Just a handful of teams from a number of continents.
But in this address to the African nations, he does make it as clear as ever what his vision for football is. And that is, it should be more global than local. And a real dig there, I think we heard, against the domestic leagues, probably the all-powerful European ones, when he's talking about someone to keep it all to themselves. Of course, FIFA are in partnership with the European Club Association in helping to sell the commercial rights to this Club World Cup. But his comment there about making football more global, of course, to many fans, football is about the domestic game, the lifeblood of football, those local rivalries, the trips domestically. But it seems that Infantino wants FIFA to have a far bigger involvement in the club game and to turn it into this global behemoth. So what do you think? Send your thoughts into us. What will the domestic leagues think? Of course, those leagues, including the Premier League, are currently part of FIFA Pro legal action against FIFA over the congested calendar. So you can see perhaps why Gianni Infantino has a bit of an issue with those domestic competitions. And this week, he was in the United States. Not sure how MLS will feel about some of his comments there that we're going to get into very shortly, because he was in Miami to announce the host nation place for the Club World Cup. So many questions about this process, but it is congratulations, Inter Miami.
With the record of points of the Major League Soccer, congratulations. You are the best team of the season in America. Based on this outstanding performance of this year, you deserve to be, and you will be, qualified for the FIFA Club World Cup 2025.
How was it secured? Inter Miami won something called the MLS Supporters Shield. Now, what is that? Can we unpack that?
Well, it's not a competition that involves every team playing every other team.
No, it's the MLS is split into 2 geographical sections, Eastern and Western Conference. The Supporters Shield goes to the team which has the best record across the season before they go into the playoffs. So that happened to be Inter Miami. But that is not the MLS champions, because that is determined by the playoffs, where you have teams from the Western Conference playing teams from the Eastern Conference and eventually going up to a final.
Although, this is what Gianni Infantino said.
Miami just played and won their last season game, the best team of America over the season.
So that was Infantino on his own Instagram, not the media questioning him. You'd think the entire season's over. And MLS didn't seem aware of these comments when I pointed it out to them, because this is their biggest part of the season now, the playoffs, the championship game, ultimately the MLS Cup, determining who are the champions. So it's sort of telling viewers around the world and in the US, the season's over, isn't it?
So they weren't aware of the comments. I wonder if they were aware that he was going to stride onto the pitch at all and announce that Inter Miami were going to be the American representative to this Club World Cup. Clearly, there is the big part of the season left. These playoffs, as you mentioned, and that grand final. The American League is structured differently. It's been allowed to by FIFA, of course. And, one of the reasons might be that these TV rights haven't been sold. So Inter Miami, Lionel Messi, the TV rights are up in November, but that final is in December. So it feels very contrived at this point.
I asked FIFA why the qualification criteria had not been announced before the announcement of Inter Miami being selected. Do you know what they said?
Did you get a reply?
No, not to that, no.
Now, winning the Supporter Shield does earn you a place in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, their version of the Champions League, although winning the MLS Cup does gain you later entry, so it is seen as superior, certainly in CONCACAF's terms. And one of the things is, of course, there's no promotion and relegation in MLS, so that's already a special exemption that they do get, because FIFA regulations do say you have to have promotion and relegation in your competitions.
Well, not the only one. They also have teams from Canada playing in the MLS. There's lots of special regulations and exemptions for the US, but they're written down on paper. As Martyn said there, none of the criteria for who was going to qualify were actually published until this sudden announcement. And the thing is, Miami, they are a very good team. They've got a very good chance of winning the MLS championship after those playoffs. It would have been a much cleaner way of doing that. Perhaps that carries a risk, though. What if they don't, and then no Messi?
And it's notable they've used Messi's involvement to really push this competition. So many posts on the FIFA-related Insta channels, on their website, top Messi moment. So there is a sense they do talk about trying to make this an inclusive competition, the Club World Cup, but they're very much drawn by the star power of one person, Lionel Messi, to promote it.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that they don't want to have a tournament in the United States without the most famous player in the world involved. And also, very important for getting a TV deal, the opening match is going to be in Miami, involving Inter Miami. So you can see why they're doing it. It's just how they did it leaves questions to be answered.
It's been a bit of a grind as well, right? No, none of that stuff, but also no Liverpool, no Manchester United, no Barcelona. In terms of like sexy tournament, big appeal, it hasn't really generated that yet, and they desperately need star power. And look, they've found a way of getting
We
some.
don't need transfer news in this pod, but Cristiano Ronaldo won't be part of this competition, although his Al Nassr contract expires at the end of this season. Has been floated. What if we try and get a short-term deal to take part in the Club World Cup to take on Messi?
Yes. Now, funny enough, at the ECA Congress a couple of weeks ago in Athens, this was up for discussion because FIFA have created these 2 mini transfer windows in between this tournament and the new season. So clubs in this 32-team Club World Cup can sign players or have free agents on their books for a few weeks, just for the duration of their tournament. And then they could move again. And that is the crazy world of the Club World Cup right now.
And this provoked such a reaction when I posted about it, some of the replies on social media, and this is only going based on those with actual names and photos, not anonymous accounts or bots or anything. One person, a Dave Cole, said they don't want to take football to the world or develop third world teams. They want to open anti-competitive markets where the richest few clubs get to vacuum up the takings. And Steve McManaman, former England Liverpool player, in his role as an ESPN pundit, complaining about this competition and the workload on the squads, but making an interesting point that he said, I think since FIFA wanted their biennial World Cup, which was quickly laughed out of town, they've sort of made a biennial World Cup. But they have just called it a Club World Cup, included the teams into it.
I thought that was quite a good point by McManaman, actually. Yes, I mean, I think since Gianni Infantino was elected, he's been looking around for some big, massive revenue generator. The jury's still out whether this is going to be it.
To be fair to Gianni Infantino here, he announced this expansion of the Club World Cup way back in 2018. There was the huge fight with UEFA after the council meeting in Bogota, Colombia, and that was before the biennial event. But he wanted something to define his time, his era as the FIFA president, just something that is his. And this feels like a bit of a millstone at the moment for him, but this could be the defining tournament of the Infantino era.
And to say McManaman was speaking as an ESPN pundit ESPN very angry about 10 years ago when FIFA awarded the 2026 World Cup rights to Fox as a way of perhaps dealing with the fallout from moving the dates of the 2022 World Cup from the North American summer to the winter.
FIFA is paying to rent all of these stadiums. This is really expensive for FIFA. They're not getting these stadiums for free. I think once they take control of them, they generate the revenue, and they've got to give tens of millions of dollars to each of these teams. This is a really expensive tournament to stage.
Final few observations on Inter Miami. David Beckham was there. Obviously, part owns the team. He didn't post anything about being with Gianni Infantino on his very active Instagram account.
No, that's interesting, wasn't it? Obviously, Beckham had a big deal with the Qatar World Cup, didn't he? And certainly posted a lot about that.
Martyn, you wrote something this week on promotion, actually, in the Times. You said, I think in your story, that the players who feel fatigued and aren't up for playing so much football, they might protest by not promoting the event.
Yeah, so the English, French and Italian players' unions are in talks about what they can do to sort of as a mark of protest, and that is one of the things being considered, which is, yes, taking part in no promotional activities.
Will they also be willing to take a pay cut as well from the distribution of the rights, the millions of euros the teams will get? And that's the point Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, the former ECA chairman, made, isn't it?
Well, they're not going to be paid any. Will they be paid any extra? I guess there'll be bonuses, but they won't get any extra salary, will they, for playing in this?
I think FIFA have inspired something interesting to look at with this qualification for Inter Miami through winning the regular season Supporters' Shield in MLS. The Champions League in Europe has just started this new big 36-team league phase, so all the teams are put on one table. Top 8 go through automatically, but finishing top doesn't carry its own status as such, apart from determining who you play next. Perhaps they should award something to the winner of the league phase to make it more lively, to give an extra bit more jeopardy in this new competition. So it's not just about who wins the ultimate prize. I don't know. Qualification for this competition next season, or even into the Club World Cup in the future.
Perhaps. I think what they do is they get to avoid playing in the playoffs, those top teams, and I think they get some seeding as well, don't they, in the round of 16?
Yes, you've got tennis-style seeding, so if you finish first, you won't play the team that finishes second until the final. That's guaranteed.
Of course, this new league phase does go into January, which means next season it's going to collide with the African Cup of Nations, which is due to be from December 2025 to January 2026 in Morocco. And the CAF President Patrice Motsepe at that CAF press conference we mentioned earlier was discussing already about a potential collision with European clubs complaining about releasing their players to the tournament. This is what Motsepe had to say at that very long news conference, which was very welcome by the media.
We want the best African players for our competitions. Crucial. The best teams in the world have got our players. They also want them at the time when we want them. And then you've got the FIFA calendar, and we understand, we want to work together with everybody. But we also have a clear, non-negotiable understanding and a commitment to make sure that when we have our competitions, we've got the best African players available. So, we work together, we argue with Europe, we disagree, and sometimes we disagree very strongly, but I think there's a common understanding. And I must say, there are always arguments and disagreements. But I can tell you this, there is more respect for African football than ever before. And, we are nice and we are polite and we are respectful, but we also know what are the issues that are non-negotiable, and the issues that we will put our foot down and say, on these issues, we're going to fight.
Yeah, what Motsepe was saying there is a perennial or biennial issue with the AFCON and the European leagues with that calendar. And he said he's going to fight for the right for the best African players to be there. And so he should. But it speaks to that bigger issue of this fight over the calendar. All sorts of stakeholders, horrible word, are fighting over determining when games should be played. There's just not enough days in the year, it seems, for all the tournaments. And senior people at FIFA and elsewhere have talked about whether AFCON should actually be a quadrennial event like the Euros and the World Cup, and the African governing bodies have said, hang on, our tournament is really old. We've always had this. Why should we bend and change for you? But it looks like there has to be some give and take if the football calendar is to be shaped, Rob.
But FIFA certainly finding someone to back their plans. An interview with Didier Drogba being promoted by FIFA, backing their Club World Cup. But, by them pushing out their own interview, we don't get to sort of delve into the more complex parts of this, which is the fact for some players from Africa who will be in the Club World Cup in June, July 2025, then in January 2025 into 2026, they will have the African Cup of Nations, and then many will hope to be part of the new 48-team Men's World Cup in June and July of 2026. So 3 tournaments in the space of a year on top of their club duties.
I need to lie down just saying all of those tournaments one after the other, let alone playing in all of those. It is exhausting. They've said there's going to be these studies. Just in terms of the CAF Congress, Rob, one person I noticed who was there was the CONMEBOL president, Alejandro Dominguez. It was interesting that he was there. We don't know what and why he was there. But as I was looking to see what he was doing, another story caught my eye. And this is a great piece of reporting by the Paraguayan newspaper ABC. And we don't really delve into stories from that part of the world that often. So the state oil company Petropar has announced a $61 million purchase of diesel from a company in Qatar that was newly formed. It's got 2 directors, and one of them happens to be Alejandro Dominguez, the CONMEBOL president's son. They've asked CONMEBOL and Alejandro Dominguez for comment, and they haven't got any yet. But I wonder where the Dominguezes met Qatari oil officials. It just shows football, that link to the world.
Well, we'll wait to hear if any response comes from them. And on oil firms, the big FIFA sponsorship announced with Aramco for the 2026 and 2027 World Cups has been subject to a protest from more than 100 players in the women's game, complaining on environmental grounds and on rights issues in Saudi Arabia and the discriminatory policies, the fact that same-sex relations are criminalised there. Interestingly, a point made by former England player Leanne Sanderson was, why is it always left for the women's players to protest? Because, of course, the Men's World Cup is before 2027.
Yeah, I mean, I actually was sort of surprised that some of the biggest names in women's football were putting their names to this. Because you're right, footballers, male footballers generally don't put their head above the parapet. So remarkable in many ways that this happened.
But it does draw extra scrutiny on those who are making those complaints. For example, saw online a degree of criticism of the Manchester City and Netherlands forward Vivian Miedema, because she was one of the players on this list, and she's playing for a country which also has questions around its human rights with Abu Dhabi and the United Arab Emirates, and that's, I guess, the tricky position players find themselves
in. And indeed environmental grounds as well too in the UAE.
True. Has FIFA responded to this protest by the women's players?
I've not had a response to them myself. I have asked, particularly to go beyond their quite generic response, which didn't seem to address the very specific points. They just said they are an inclusive organisation, doesn't address the particular rights issues, and it talks about how the money is being reinvested back into the game. So effectively that seems to be saying, look, if you want big prize money, if you want this money coming into the women's game, you've got to accept the sponsors we give you.
Yeah, well, that's a point of view.
We did hear a counter view, though, from someone in the media. The Australian journalist Tracy Holmes complaining about a media rush to amplify the player petition, saying other voices are equally valid to be heard, talking about how Saudi Arabia has changed exponentially over the last decade, more than women's football has in the West. Well, it was an open letter, so we'll see if there is a substantive response from FIFA. We've been so focused on football governance in this episode, it can seem like football gets all the scrutiny and attention, but what is lurking within other sports that aren't in the limelight? We heard quite a bit about World Triathlon during the Paris Olympics because the River Seine was deemed too dirty on some days for competitions to take place. Now it's all about the election to lead World Triathlon that's generating bit of scrutiny.
Remarkable events, really, in Torremolinos, where the Congress of the World Triathlon was held this week. Jens Weinreich, the German investigative journalist, done a lot of good work on this. What appears to have happened is the Antonio Aramani, the Spanish presidential candidate, he got loads and loads of backers behind him from Asia, the Americas, and Africa. And it turned out that a list was produced by supporters telling delegates exactly who they should vote for. So the president, the vice president, the executive board, and all lots of different committees as well. And the remarkable thing is, the list that was produced beforehand was almost exactly what happened in the results before. So not surprisingly, the three other candidates who were running for president have cried foul. There's Ian Howard from Great Britain. He was being backed by UK Sport, the sort of public body which provides money for Olympic sports. So they gave him £12,000 to help his travel expenses. And then Denmark's Mads Freund, and then Hungary's Tamas Toth. They've all lodged complaints alleging dodgy practices, dirty tricks, and other members have even claimed they've been sort of bullied and threatened to withdraw from the presidential race.
Looking quickly at the World Triathlon accounts, in 2022 they received $9.5 million from the IOC Contribution Fund. In 2021 they received $12.7 million approximately. Surely this is something that the IOC should be taking note of. This is who is receiving their money.
I wouldn't hold your breath there, because the winning candidate, unless I'm mistaken, is also a very senior official at ASWAF, this umbrella body for Summer Olympic Sports. So very well connected to the Olympic world. He's also a vice president of the Court of Arbitration for Sport. So well in, as it were, in the Olympic family or the movement. So there you go. This list, it reminds me of exactly similar elections in the past, notably an election for the Asian Football Confederation governing body. This list at the time then was promoted and provided by Sheikh Ahmed of Kuwait, who's now been banned from international sport. And that entire list was voted on in exactly the same way. And guess what, guys? Nothing happened.
This was football, of course. It would be headline news over the world. And just what other sports perhaps do when they don't have the spotlight on them as intently, with so many reporters covering them. In fact, there'll be very few reporters covering World Triathlon. So I'm sure many people are learning about this for the first time just hearing us discuss it.
I'm sure they are. I mean, I went to World Triathlon for their response. They said the elections were conducted in a transparent and democratic way and fully respecting the World Triathlon Constitution and rules. So I don't think this is going to be the end of the matter, though, because I think people are going to push very hard on this. It's whether World Triathlon has the necessary ethics bodies involved in it, see if they are independent to tackle this properly.
And who audited the election?
Was there an auditor? Good question.
Well, the appeal as well, this shows what a mess of governance sport is. If it goes to the Court of Arbitration for Sport and the winning candidate is the vice chairman of the Court of Arbitration for Sport, what hope have you got that this is going to be a clean and transparent process? Maybe it will be, but it does raise some doubts.
Everyone can think the world of sports governance is so bleak listening to us, but certainly good to delve into it. Should we end on a bit of a sympathetic note? It's not very often perhaps on this podcast, but I want to turn to the fourth tier in Swedish women's football and perhaps celebrate the fact that the team Angelholm had a completely unbeaten season. They didn't concede a goal, but they didn't win the title.
How did that work then?
Because they actually only won 15 of their 18 games and they missed out by a point. So those 3 draws proved very costly. So harsh, isn't it?
Who were the lucky winners there? Who were the champions that managed to secure the victory there?
Well, it is congratulations to Lungbyhead IF. Hopefully I've got that pronunciation right.
Fantastic news to everyone at Lungbyhead.
Yeah.
Maybe you can go a season without conceding next season.
Martyn, Tariq, great stuff. We certainly go far and wide on this pod, even to the Swedish 4th Division, after hearing from so many of those running the game in this episode. As ever, send your thoughts at Sport Unlocked on all the social media accounts. And if you like us and subscribe to us, whichever pod platform you're listening to us on, then we land in your feeds automatically. But for now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.